I want to talk to you guys about the importance of a wife taking her husband's last name. First, I'll start out with this that taking your husband's last name is not explicitly biblical. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't see anything specifically in scripture that says that a wife has to take the last name of her husband. Now, with that said, God does remind us very early in the Bible, I believe we're second chapter of Genesis, that a husband and wife, when they join together, they become one flesh. So with that being said, you have to ask yourself, does having separate last names sound like one flesh? Yeah, I'm going to sound old school on this, whatever, but hear me out. I stand by the fact that wives need to take the last name of their husband. And why is that? A few reasons. First of all, it is a public sign of unity. What I'm trying to say is you're not ashamed. You're not ashamed to be under your husband's covenant. You're not ashamed to be part of his family line. I know if you have a separate last name, you're not explicitly saying that, but there's a subtle implication. Another thing is that to me, it represents a sign of clinging to the past, almost like you either have a foot out the door or you're trying to live and reminisce the way things used to be. Now, you might say I'm looking too deep into it, but that's just what it sounds like to me. The other thing is that when you take your husband's last name, it really is a representative of that biblical, that covenantal hierarchy. So we have Jesus Christ at the head of every man, and the man being head of a woman. And sharing that name is really a symbolic commitment to that line. I want to say in addition that I would also recommend against avoiding, or excuse me, I would recommend that you avoid cop outs. What do I mean by cop outs? One being hyphenated names. So, wives, if your last name is, I don't know, Jones, and your husband's last name is Smith, and going by Jones hyphen Smith or Smith hyphen Jones. First of all, that's just too many letters, too much wordage. But yeah, that's kind of a cop out. It's almost a compromise, and it still kind of has that one foot out the door feeling, as if you didn't take the last name. Another thing is professional names, and by that I mean, you see that with some actors, entertainers, musicians sometimes, where their maiden name is their main marquee. It's what they put on the cover of the album or what they put on the movie poster, but privately they go by a different name. And I think that's kind of a cop out. And then the real cop out, and I don't even call this a cop out, this is just wild to me, but men taking their wives' last name, which I would consider a big no-no because it really represents a switching, a reversal of the proper biblical roles in alignment. It reminds me that, the first time, the very first time that happened, look way back in Genesis chapter 3, where the roles got reversed and, there was a mix up. And long story short, we've been living in sin in this world ever since. And you might think that it's just a name, it's just a word, a few letters, but I really do think it makes a big deal. In conclusion, here's how I look at it as a husband. And for the disclaimer, for the record, my wife shares my last name. But my conclusion is that you as a husband, I'm talking to husbands here specifically, you want to be so irresistible to your potential life, or excuse me, your potential wife, to where she's head over heels with you, that she wants all of you. She wants everything. She wants your kids. She wants to live in the same house as you. She wants to live under your roof. She wants your last name, everything, because you're all that she could ever want. Isn't that beautiful? you know, that just sounds beautiful when I say all that, when I think of all that. And on the flip side, if your wife is so ironclad and unwilling to budge on what is essentially a few letters on her driver's license, like if that's becomes a deal breaker, it might be time for a really deep discussion. And these are the kind of things when we talk about taking the last name. These are the kind of things that you should be discussing, well before you actually tie the knot. You don't want any last minute surprises when you're getting the proper documentation. This shouldn't come up all of a sudden. These are the kind of things that you should talk about. And I do think it's significant enough to where it would be along the same lines of the conversation of, hey, how many kids do we want to have? And, what kind of house we want to live in? Those are kinds of things you discuss. And whether or not your wife takes your last name, that's an important discussion because it represents you. It represents the family. It represents your bond. It represents that covenant. And there's an ironclad, no, I'm not going to change my last name. You really gotta settle that. And I don't know if that comes from some kind of, I know nowadays, some women might think it's domineering, or there might be some kind of a feminist tone to it. I don't know what it is, but if there's not going to be a sharing of the last name, then that's something that you really need to nip in the bud. Yeah, this is a relatively short video, but I just wanted to touch on that. I'm a huge believer in, the family really is one. Like when I say nuclear family, which is in the title here, I really mean that it's like one big nucleus. You really are one flesh. I really do believe that, hold strong to that. And any sort of ideology that leads to a feeling of separation, or we're going to go our separate ways if something doesn't work out, you might want to watch my video that I made before about not treating your marriage like a temporary contract, like an NFL professional football player. You have to be really careful about stuff like that. This is permanent. This is till death do us parts. And the last name, you might think that it's subtle or I'm overthinking this. I don't care. It's a big deal, and it's something that you should address. So that's all I got for today. Appreciate you watching, listening, and have a blessed day. Peace.